Long before human beings built cities, wrote myths, or mapped the stars, the world belonged to plants. Vast forests once covered nearly every continent, breathing slowly beneath ancient skies, quietly shaping the atmosphere itself. The oxygen in the room around you now, drifting invisibly into your lungs, was built by generations of leaves so old that their descendants no longer resemble them. In many ways, plants created the conditions for complex life long before animals ever learned to move across the earth. And yet, despite living among them every day, most people barely notice them at all. There is something strangely invisible about plants. An animal announces itself. It hunts, flees, calls out into the night. A plant remains still, silent, rooted in place for decades, centuries, sometimes even millennia. To the human nervous system, movement often signals importance, and stillness fades into the background. But beneath that stillness lies a world of extraordinary activity. Entire forests communicate. Roots trade nutrients underground, leaves track the sun with astonishing precision, flowers manipulate insects using ultraviolet patterns invisible to human eyes. Some plants can count, some can remember, some appear to recognize relatives. At night, a forest can feel almost impossibly calm. The air cools, moisture gathers softly on leaves, branches shift in slow waves against the darkness, but hidden beneath the quiet surface is an intricate living network operating continuously without rest. Tiny chemical signals drift through bark and soil. Fungi thread themselves through roots like biological fiber optic cables. Sugars flow downward through trunks, while minerals rise upward from deep underground reservoirs. Even in apparent silence, a forest is alive with movement too slow for human perception. Perhaps this is one reason people feel unusually peaceful around plants. Modern psychology has repeatedly shown that exposure to greenery lowers stress hormones, reduces blood pressure, and calms activity in parts of the brain associated with fear and mental fatigue. In hospitals, patients recover faster when they can see trees through a window. In cities, neighborhoods with more plant life often report lower anxiety and aggression. Even brief contact with gardens or forests appears to alter the nervous system in measurable ways. Scientists still debate exactly why this happens. Part of it may be evolutionary memory. For most of human history, green landscapes signaled safety, water, food, and shelter. A healthy forest meant survival. But there may also be something deeper and more subtle occurring. Plants operate on timescales radically different from our own. Their pace is slower than human urgency. To observe a tree carefully is to enter another rhythm entirely. An oak tree may spend 200 years reaching its full size. Some bristlecone pines living quietly in the mountains of the western United States were already ancient when the pyramids of Egypt were young. One individual tree in California, known as Methuselah, is believed to be nearly 5,000 years old. It has survived storms, droughts, empires, migrations, and civilizations simply by continuing the slow work of living. There is something almost difficult to comprehend about an organism remaining alive for so long, without ever walking, speaking, or leaving the place where it first began as a seed. Human lives move quickly by comparison. We measure time in deadlines, schedules, and calendars. Plants measure time in seasons, rainfall patterns, and the angle of sunlight drifting across decades. Even the way plants eat feels strangely peaceful when examined closely. Every green leaf on Earth is performing one of the most important chemical reactions in the history of life. Through photosynthesis, plants capture photons that left the surface of the sun more than 8 minutes earlier. Those particles of light strike chlorophyll molecules inside the leaf, initiating a chain of events so elegant that scientists are still uncovering its finer details. Water drawn upward from roots combines with carbon dioxide pulled from the atmosphere. Slowly, silently, the plant transforms sunlight into stored energy. Nearly all complex life on Earth depends on this process. Every forest, every grain field, every animal, every human civilization rests upon the quiet labor of leaves converting light into matter. Entire ecosystems are built from sunlight filtered through plants first, and yet photosynthesis itself unfolds without sound. No visible flash, no dramatic movement. Just billions upon billions of leaves working patiently beneath daylight across the surface of the earth. In tropical rainforests, some leaves are so large that rainwater gathers and slides from them in heavy drops that echo through the canopy below. In deserts, cactus spines evolved from leaves entirely, helping conserve precious moisture in places where rain may not fall for months. In northern forests, evergreen needles remain through winter, continuing their slow collection of energy even in cold silence beneath snow. Plants have adapted to almost every environment imaginable. Tiny mosses cling to volcanic rock. Mangroves grow directly from saltwater coastlines. Orchids suspend themselves high above the ground in humid air. Some seeds remain dormant for decades, waiting for the exact conditions required to awaken. One of the most fascinating examples comes from certain pine forests that rely on fire itself. Their cones remain sealed shut with resin until intense heat passes through the forest. Only then do they open, releasing seeds into freshly cleared ground rich with nutrients. To human observers, wildfire often appears purely destructive, but for these forests, fire is part of an ancient cycle of renewal. Life emerging quietly from ashes. There is a strange emotional comfort in this pattern repeating throughout nature. Plants endure loss differently than animals do. A tree may lose entire branches in a storm and continue living for centuries afterward. Forests regrow after fires. Grasslands return after drought. Beneath the apparent fragility of leaves and petals lies an extraordinary resilience. Some scientists believe plants possess forms of intelligence fundamentally unlike our own. Not consciousness in the human sense, perhaps, but distributed systems of perception and response far more sophisticated than once imagined. Plants can detect gravity, moisture, touch, temperature, seasonal changes, nearby competitors, and chemical signals in the air. They constantly gather information from their surroundings and alter their behavior accordingly. A climbing vine, for example, can sense nearby structures and gradually adjust its growth toward support. Sunflowers track the movement of the sun across the sky while young, then settle eastward as they mature. Certain plants release airborne chemicals when attacked by insects, warning neighboring plants to activate defensive compounds before damage spreads. Beneath the soil, the story becomes even more extraordinary. The ground beneath a forest floor is not empty dirt. It is a dense living architecture filled with roots, bacteria, fungi, insects, minerals, moisture, and microscopic exchanges occurring every second. Some scientists have described fungal networks connecting trees as resembling a natural internet, though slower and infinitely older. Through these underground pathways, trees can share nutrients and chemical signals across surprisingly large distances. Older trees sometimes support younger saplings growing in deep shade by transferring carbon compounds through fungal connections attached to their roots. Forests, it seems, may behave less like collections of isolated individuals and more like deeply interconnected communities, and in the quiet darkness underground, where no human eye normally looks. This exchange continues endlessly beneath the sleeping world above. In some forests, the oldest trees become vast biological centers around which entire ecosystems organize themselves. Their roots spread outward through the earth like hidden rivers. Their branches alter wind patterns, shade temperatures, and moisture levels beneath the canopy. Birds nest within cavities formed over centuries. Moss gathers across bark, softened by rain and time. Insects tunnel through fallen limbs, returning wood slowly back into the soil. Even after death, a tree may continue supporting life for generations. A fallen log in a forest often appears lifeless at first glance, yet it may contain more biological activity than when it stood upright. Fungi bloom quietly across its surface. Ferns emerge from pockets of softened bark. Beetles carve intricate passageways invisible from above. Salamanders shelter beneath damp layers of decomposing wood. Slowly, over decades, the tree dissolves back into the forest floor that once nourished it. There is no sharp boundary between life and decay in nature. plants seem to understand this in a way human civilization often forgets. In forests, endings are rarely final. They become transitions. Matter changes form. Energy moves onward. Nothing remains fixed for very long except the continuity of the system itself. This slow continuity may explain why ancient forests often feel almost sacred to people regardless of culture or belief. Around the world, human beings repeatedly associated large trees with wisdom, memory, and permanence. Sacred groves appeared in civilizations separated by oceans and thousands of years of history. In Japan, certain ancient trees are wrapped with ceremonial ropes, marking them as spiritually significant. In parts of Europe, enormous oaks once served as gathering places long before formal buildings existed. Many indigenous traditions viewed forests not as resources to conquer, but as living communities deserving respect. Perhaps this reverence emerged partly from scale. A mature forest exists beyond a single human lifetime. The people who plant trees often never sit fully beneath their shade. To walk among ancient trunks is to encounter living organisms that experienced centuries the way humans experience seasons, and trees record those centuries within themselves. Inside every trunk are growth rings, preserving silent evidence of changing climates, droughts, volcanic eruptions, and fires. Scientists studying these rings can reconstruct environmental conditions stretching far into the past. A tree standing quietly on a mountainside may contain a historical archive older than entire nations. Even more remarkable is the way plants respond to time itself. Unlike animals, many plants continue growing throughout their lives. There is no fixed adult form in the strict sense. A tree does not truly stop becoming. Each spring adds new layers. Each season reshapes the organism slightly. Damage becomes incorporated into future growth patterns. Scar tissue folds into bark. Branches adapt around absence. In this sense, plants carry their history visibly. Human beings often attempt to hide aging, damage, or imperfection. Trees simply grow around it. Some of the quietest wonders in the plant world happen too slowly for ordinary observation. If a flower blooming over several days is compressed into seconds through time-lapse photography, the motion appears almost animal-like. Petals unfold with deliberate precision. Vines search through space in slow spirals. Roots navigate around obstacles underground with surprising sensitivity. Entire gardens sway and reposition themselves continuously beneath sunlight. To human perception, plants seem passive because our lives move too quickly. There are plants that sleep each night. Certain flowers close their petals after sunset and reopen with dawn. Some leaves fold inward during darkness to conserve heat and moisture. Scientists once believed these movements were purely mechanical responses to light, but experiments later revealed that many plants maintain internal circadian rhythms even when isolated from natural sunlight entirely. Deep inside their tissues, biological clocks continue counting time. In tropical regions, enormous water lilies spread across still ponds with leaves wide enough to support significant weight. In deserts, ancient creosote bushes clone themselves outward in expanding rings that may survive for thousands of years. Bamboo, meanwhile, can grow with astonishing speed, sometimes nearly 3 feet in a single day under ideal conditions. The plant kingdom contains both extreme patience and extraordinary urgency. Carnivorous plants reveal another unexpected layer of complexity. In nutrient-poor bogs where ordinary survival becomes difficult, species like the Venus flytrap evolved entirely different strategies. Sensitive trigger hairs inside the trap detect movement from insects. When stimulated multiple times in rapid succession, the leaves snap shut with startling speed. The plant then slowly digests its captured prey over days. For centuries, people found such plants deeply unsettling because they blurred familiar boundaries between plant and animal behavior. A moving plant seemed almost impossible, as though nature itself had crossed one of its invisible categories. But evolution rarely respects the categories humans invent. The deeper scientists look into plant biology, the more complicated the picture becomes. Some research suggests plants can distinguish between self and non-self roots underground. Others show evidence that certain species respond differently to familiar environmental patterns based on previous exposure, almost resembling primitive memory. While these processes differ profoundly from human thought, they reveal a level of responsiveness far beyond what earlier generations imagined. And perhaps part of the fascination comes from realizing how different plant existence truly is from our own. A plant experiences the world rooted permanently in one location. It cannot flee danger. It cannot migrate toward comfort. Everything must be solved through adaptation. Defense chemicals, altered growth patterns, symbiotic relationships, seasonal timing, seed dispersal strategies, all evolved from the simple necessity of surviving without movement over millions of years. This stillness produced extraordinary creativity. Some flowers evolved shapes that perfectly match the bodies of specific pollinators. Certain orchids resemble female insects closely enough to attract males attempting to mate with them, unknowingly spreading pollen in the process. Other plants produce scents strongest at night, specifically to attract moths traveling through darkness. Entire evolutionary partnerships formed between species across immense stretches of time. The relationship between flowering plants and pollinating insects transformed the earth itself. Before flowers became widespread, landscapes looked profoundly different. The arrival of flowering plants roughly 140 million years ago reshaped ecosystems on a planetary scale. Colors, fragrances, fruits, and nectar spread across continents, influencing the evolution of birds, insects, mammals, and eventually humans. Even emotions became connected to flowers. Across nearly every culture, people instinctively use plants to communicate feelings difficult to express directly. Roses for love, lilies for mourning, olive branches for peace, bouquets for apology, celebration, remembrance, or farewell. It is striking that human beings so often turn to fragile living things when trying to represent emotions that feel too large for language. Perhaps flowers remind us of something fundamental about beauty itself. Their existence is temporary by design. Blossoms emerge, open briefly, and fade. Cherry blossoms drifting through spring air have become symbols of impermanence precisely because they vanish so quickly. Their beauty is inseparable from their shortness, and maybe this is part of why plants calm the human mind so effectively. They embody cycles without resistance: growth and decay, bloom and dormancy, emergence and return. A forest never hurries, yet nothing within it remains still forever. In autumn forests across North America, entire mountainsides slowly transform into oceans of color. Chlorophyll, the green pigment dominating leaves through summer, begins to break down as daylight shortens. Beneath it, hidden pigments finally emerge. Deep golds, burnt oranges, muted reds. For most of the year, these colors were already present inside the leaves, concealed beneath the machinery of photosynthesis. Only when the leaf prepares to die do they become visible. There is something quietly profound in that. The final stage of the leaf reveals colors that existed all along. As temperatures cool, trees begin sealing off each leaf from the branches that supported it. Tiny cellular barriers form near the stem. Nutrients are withdrawn and stored for winter. Eventually, the leaf releases itself and drifts downward to the forest floor, where fungi and bacteria will slowly dismantle it molecule by molecule. By spring, much of it will already be part of the soil again. A forest is constantly recycling itself. Even the scent of forests comes partly from this slow transformation. The smell of damp earth after rain, sometimes called petrichor, combines oils from plants, moisture, and compounds released by soil bacteria. Pine forests release aromatic molecules into the air that many people instinctively associate with calmness and clarity. In Japan, researchers studying forest bathing, or Shinrin-yoku, discovered measurable physiological effects from spending time among trees. Heart rates slowed, stress hormones decreased. Immune activity appeared to improve after extended exposure to forest environments. Scientists later identified some contributing compounds known as phytoncides, airborne chemicals released by trees, partly as defense mechanisms against insects and microbial threats. Humans inhale these molecules while walking through forests, and although research continues, Many studies suggest they may subtly influence the nervous and immune systems. The forest, it seems, does not merely surround us. It interacts with us chemically, invisibly, continuously. For most of human existence, this interaction was unavoidable. People lived close to plants because survival required it. Medicines came from bark, roots, and leaves. Willow bark contained compounds that eventually inspired aspirin. The Madagascar periwinkle contributed chemicals later used in cancer treatments. Ancient cultures accumulated vast botanical knowledge through observation passed carefully across generations. Many modern medicines still trace their origins back to plant chemistry. Plants evolved these compounds not for human benefit, but for survival. Some deter herbivores through bitterness or toxicity. Others attract pollinators with sweetness and scent. Over millions of years, plants became master chemists, producing astonishing molecular diversity inside silent green tissues. A single rainforest may contain thousands of plant species, many still poorly understood by science. Some researchers believe potential medicines disappear before they are even discovered, as habitats vanish through deforestation. Entire biochemical libraries may exist, hidden within leaves that no human being has carefully studied yet. Rainforests themselves feel almost dreamlike in their complexity. Layers of vegetation rise upward from dark forest floors toward canopies hundreds of feet above. Light filters downward in shifting columns through humid air. Water drips constantly from unseen leaves. Insects hum softly in enormous numbers. Vines descend like ropes between towering trunks, and everywhere, plants compete quietly for sunlight. In dense forests, access to light becomes one of the most important forces shaping life. Young saplings may wait decades beneath the canopy for a single opening created by a fallen tree. When sunlight finally reaches the forest floor, dormant growth can accelerate suddenly. Leaves spread outward. Thin trunks rise rapidly toward the opening overhead. Plants are often perceived as peaceful, but forests are also places of immense competition. Roots compete for water. Branches position themselves for light. Some trees release chemicals into the soil that inhibit nearby rivals. Certain vines climb aggressively toward the canopy, using other plants as living scaffolding, yet even this competition unfolds with extraordinary slowness. Human conflict erupts visibly and violently. Forest conflict may take decades to fully reveal itself. In deserts, where conditions become harsher still, plants display some of their most remarkable adaptations. Cacti store water within thick tissues capable of expanding after rare rains. Tiny hairs and waxy coatings reduce evaporation beneath intense sunlight. Some desert flowers remain dormant as seeds for years, waiting patiently beneath dry soil until rainfall arrives. Then, almost unbelievably, entire landscapes bloom. For a brief period, deserts erupt with color, carpets of flowers appearing across terrain that seemed lifeless only days earlier. Bees arrive, seeds form rapidly. Then the blooms fade once more beneath the returning heat. Plants understand patience better than perhaps any other form of life on Earth. Some seeds germinate only after passing through fire or the digestive systems of animals. Others remain frozen in Arctic soils for astonishing lengths of time before conditions permit growth again. In laboratory settings, scientists have successfully germinated ancient seeds recovered from archaeological sites thousands of years old. Inside every seed exists a kind of suspended future. A seed appears inactive, almost inert, yet within it lies compressed biological instruction accumulated through countless generations. Roots, stems, leaves, flowers. The entire architecture of the future plant exists encoded inside microscopic structures waiting only for water, temperature, and light. There is something deeply calming about this hidden potential scattered constantly across the earth. Millions of seeds drift invisibly through the air each day. Some spin downward like tiny helicopters, others float across oceans. Some travel inside fruit eaten by birds and mammals. Forests expand partly through chance, carried gently by wind. The maple seed falling through autumn air does not know where it will land. Yet, over immense spans of time, forests continue emerging. Human civilization often imagines control as the central force shaping the world. Plants reveal another kind of power entirely: persistence without urgency. A crack forms in concrete. Eventually moss appears, then grass, then perhaps small shrubs. Given enough time, even abandoned cities begin softening beneath vegetation. Nature does not rush this process. Roots widen tiny fractures gradually. Moisture gathers, soil accumulates, seeds arrive unnoticed, and slowly, the living world returns. Some of the oldest living organisms on Earth are not animals at all, but enormous plant systems connected underground. In Utah, a quaking aspen colony known as Pando consists of thousands of trunks sharing one vast root network. Though individual trunks die and regrow over time, the organism itself may be thousands of years old. A forest that appears composed of many trees may, in some cases, be one living being. This blurring of individuality appears again and again in the plant world. Clonal grasses spread outward indefinitely. Strawberry plants send runners across the ground, forming genetically identical descendants. Coral-like mats of vegetation expand slowly across landscapes in patterns difficult to define as separate individuals. Plants challenge many assumptions humans naturally make about identity, intelligence, and survival. Perhaps because their lives unfold so slowly, they invite a different kind of attention from us. To sit quietly near plants is to encounter existence operating without anxiety. A tree does not struggle to become tomorrow all at once. Growth happens ring by ring, root by root, season by season. And perhaps this is why gardens have remained important to human beings across so many different civilizations. Not merely as sources of food or decoration, but as places where time itself feels altered. In Persian gardens, water channels reflected moonlight beneath carefully arranged trees. In Chinese landscape gardens, winding paths revealed scenes gradually, encouraging slow observation rather than direct arrival. Monastic gardens in medieval Europe provided silence for contemplation among medicinal herbs and fruit trees. Across cultures separated by oceans and centuries, people repeatedly created enclosed spaces filled with plants where the mind could settle into quieter rhythms. A garden changes differently from any room built by human hands. Walls remain mostly the same from one day to the next. A garden is never truly identical twice. Light shifts across leaves. New growth appears silently overnight. Flowers open and fade. Rain alters color and scent. Wind rearranges shadows moment by moment. To care for plants requires attention to gradual change. This can feel strangely restorative in a world increasingly dominated by speed and constant stimulation. Modern life often compresses experience into notifications, headlines, schedules, and immediate responses. Plants resist that tempo entirely. No amount of urgency can force a tree to mature faster than its biology allows. A seed cannot be rushed into blooming through anxiety. Growth remains faithful to time. Even indoors, people instinctively bring plants into their living spaces. Small pots sit beside apartment windows. Vines trail softly from shelves. Succulents rest on office desks beneath artificial light. Researchers studying indoor environments have found that the mere presence of plants can subtly improve concentration, mood, and perceived air quality. Some experiments suggest people become slightly calmer and more patient in rooms containing natural greenery. Part of this effect may come from attention itself. Plants encourage a softer form of awareness than screens or machines. Watching leaves move gently in airflow requires no urgency. There is nothing to solve immediately, nothing demanding rapid judgment. The nervous system appears to relax when exposed to patterns common in nature. Branching forms, irregular textures, organic movement, changing light. Mathematicians and biologists have long been fascinated by these patterns. Ferns, river systems, lightning bolts, tree branches, even blood vessels often follow similar structural principles known as fractals. Simple repeating rules generate astonishing complexity across scales. A branch resembles a smaller version of the tree itself. Veins inside leaves mirror branching systems seen from airplanes high above forests. Nature repeats successful designs endlessly. There is also a subtle emotional quality to plant life that many people sense but rarely articulate clearly. Plants embody vulnerability and resilience simultaneously. A flower petal bruises easily. A young seedling may fail from a single harsh frost. Yet forests survive ice ages. Grasslands recover after fire. Tiny weeds emerge through asphalt in crowded cities. Fragility and persistence coexist. This coexistence appears throughout the natural world. Bamboo bends deeply during storms rather than resisting rigidly. Certain desert plants remain dormant through years of drought, yet revive rapidly when rain finally returns. Some trees growing along coastlines twist permanently in response to prevailing winds, their forms shaped by forces encountered over decades. Plants do not escape their environments. They become shaped by them. In a way, every tree is partly a physical memory of the conditions surrounding it. Harsh winters create narrow growth rings. Abundant rainfall creates wider ones. Wind influences branch direction. Damage leaves scars folded gradually into future layers of wood. Human beings carry experience differently, mostly hidden within thought and emotion. Plants carry experience visibly in their bodies. Perhaps this is one reason ancient trees often feel emotionally moving to stand beside. Their age is not abstract. It is physically present in bark thickness, branch architecture, immense root systems anchoring deeply into the ground. To place a hand against an old trunk is to touch something that has remained alive through generations of human lives. Some coastal redwoods in California rise over 300 feet tall, among the tallest living organisms on Earth. Fog drifts through their upper branches so high above the forest floor that the canopy forms its own ecosystem. Ferns and mosses grow in suspended soil, collected along enormous limbs. Salamanders live high above the ground in hidden pockets of moisture. A single tree can contain entire worlds within itself, and trees shape climate on scales far larger than many people realize. Forests influence rainfall patterns, temperatures, soil stability, and atmospheric carbon levels across continents. The Amazon rainforest releases vast quantities of moisture into the atmosphere through transpiration, where water evaporates from leaves into the air. Some scientists describe parts of the forest as functioning almost like biological rivers in the sky, helping generate rainfall far beyond the forest itself. Plants do not merely inhabit environments. They create them. Long before humans began altering planetary systems through industry and technology, plants transformed Earth completely. Early photosynthetic organisms gradually filled the atmosphere with oxygen billions of years ago, making complex animal life possible. Entire geological eras shifted because ancient plants changed atmospheric chemistry over immense spans of time. The coal burned during the Industrial Revolution came largely from forests buried hundreds of millions of years earlier. Sunlight captured by prehistoric plants became compressed underground across geological ages, only to be released again by human civilization in a relatively brief moment of history. In this sense, modern cities still run partly on ancient forests. And despite all technological advancement, human survival remains profoundly dependent on plant life. Crops feed billions of people, forests stabilize climates and water systems, oceanic phytoplankton, microscopic photosynthetic organisms generate enormous portions of the world's oxygen. Every breath still connects us invisibly to photosynthesis occurring continuously across land and sea. There is a quiet humility in realizing this dependence. Human beings often imagine themselves separate from nature, yet every meal, every breath, every wooden structure, every woven fabric, every paper page traces back ultimately to plants converting sunlight into living matter. Civilizations rise upon agriculture, economies depend on harvests. Entire histories have turned because of crop failures, fertile river valleys, or changing growing seasons. And still, most plants continue their work unnoticed. Perhaps that unnoticed quality is part of their strange beauty. Plants rarely demand attention directly. They simply persist. Grass grows through forgotten sidewalks. Wild flowers appear beside highways. Moss spreads silently across stone after rain. Forests reclaim abandoned places slowly enough that the process feels almost invisible until decades have passed. At night, when wind moves softly through leaves, forests can sound almost like distant water. Branches shift against one another with slow wooden creaks. Insects hum beneath the canopy. Somewhere roots continue drawing moisture upward from dark soil toward the stars above. And throughout it all, the plants remain patient. Patience in the plant world is not passive. It is active. Continuous adaptation unfolding so gradually that human perception often mistakes it for stillness. A tree standing quietly in a field may be responding every moment to light, gravity, temperature, moisture, insects, fungi, and neighboring plants. Tiny pores on leaves open and close to regulate water loss. Roots alter their direction through the soil in search of minerals. Hormones move through tissues carrying chemical instructions from one region of the organism to another. Inside even the simplest leaf, countless microscopic decisions are constantly being made, and yet the overall impression remains calm, perhaps because plants rarely waste energy. Evolution shaped them toward extraordinary efficiency. Leaves angle themselves to maximize sunlight exposure. Vascular systems transport water upward against gravity, using mechanisms so refined that engineers still study them for inspiration. Some desert plants open their pores only at night to conserve moisture beneath brutal daytime heat. Others coat themselves in reflective hairs that scatter sunlight away from delicate tissues. Nature repeatedly solves survival through elegance rather than excess. One of the most extraordinary examples can be found in the redwood forests along the Pacific coast of North America. These towering trees do not rely only on rainfall reaching the ground. During dry seasons, they absorb moisture directly from drifting fog. Tiny droplets gather along needles high above the forest floor and slowly descend through the canopy, sustaining entire ecosystems beneath them. In a sense, the forest drinks clouds. 6. At night, plants behave differently than they do during the day. Without sunlight, photosynthesis slows or stops, but metabolism continues. Sugars produced earlier move through stems and roots. Growth often accelerates in darkness. Certain flowers release stronger fragrances after sunset specifically to attract nocturnal pollinators such as moths or bats. In tropical forests, some blooms open for only a single night before fading forever by morning. Entire ecological relationships unfold while most humans sleep. There are cacti pollinated almost exclusively by bats navigating desert darkness through echolocation. There are flowers shaped precisely for hummingbirds whose curved beaks fit certain blossoms like living keys. In Madagascar, one orchid possesses a nectar tube so long that when it was first discovered, naturalists predicted a moth with an equally long feeding structure must exist somewhere in the forest. Years later, that moth was found exactly as predicted. Evolution can create relationships so precise they seem almost imagined. But these partnerships emerge gradually over millions of years through countless small adjustments. Plants and pollinators shaping one another generation after generation until form, color, scent, and behavior align with astonishing intricacy. Even color itself functions differently in the plant world than humans once realized. Many flowers display ultraviolet patterns invisible to the human eye but vividly apparent to bees and other insects. What appears plain white to us may contain glowing pathways directing pollinators toward nectar hidden at the flower's center. A meadow contains entire visual languages humans cannot naturally see, and plants respond to sound in curious ways as well. Some studies suggest certain species alter growth patterns in response to vibrations or frequencies associated with flowing water or insect activity. Research in this area remains debated and incomplete, yet it continues revealing how sensitive living organisms may be to subtle environmental signals. The deeper science explores plant life. The less separate plants appear from the larger systems around them. Forests influence weather. Oceans depend on microscopic photosynthetic organisms. Soil microbes collaborate constantly with roots. Fungi transport nutrients between distant trees. Insects, birds, mammals, and plants participate together in networks so interdependent that removing one species may alter entire ecosystems in unexpected ways. Life on Earth is less like a collection of isolated objects and more like overlapping conversations happening continuously across scales. A single bee visiting flowers through a summer field participates in ancient exchanges older than humanity itself. Nectar rewards the insect with energy while pollen travels unknowingly between blossoms, allowing reproduction. Fruit forms afterward. Seeds develop. Birds eat the fruit and carry those seeds elsewhere. From simple interactions, landscapes emerge. There is also something deeply atmospheric about the sounds associated with plants. Unlike the sudden noises produced by machines or crowded cities, plant sounds tend to unfold gradually. Wind moving through pine needles creates long whispering textures. Rain striking broad tropical leaves produces soft irregular rhythms. Bamboo groves knock gently together in storms. Tall grasses ripple like waves across open plains. These sounds rarely demand attention aggressively. They blend into surroundings, creating environments that feel spacious rather than crowded. Perhaps this is why forests so often appear in dreams, myths, and literature as places of transformation. To enter a forest historically meant stepping beyond the controlled boundaries of civilization into older systems not governed by human rules. Forests concealed danger, mystery, refuge, food, medicine, and spiritual meaning simultaneously. Even today, dense forests can evoke strange emotional reactions. People frequently describe feeling smaller there, but not necessarily in an unpleasant way. The towering scale of old trees, the filtered light, the hidden movement within undergrowth, all of it can produce a sense of perspective difficult to experience in ordinary urban life. Plants quietly remind human beings that they are part of something much older and larger than themselves. Some philosophers and psychologists believe experiences of awe play an important role in mental well-being. Awe shifts attention away from constant self-focus and reconnects perception to wider patterns beyond immediate personal concerns. Ancient forests, mountain ranges, oceans, and star-filled skies often produce this effect naturally, and plants contribute profoundly to those environments. Imagine the earth without them for a moment. No forests softening the horizon, no fields moving beneath wind, no flowers beside roadsides, no shade trees along rivers, no scent of rain on leaves during summer evenings. The planet would feel almost alien. Plants give Earth much of its emotional atmosphere. Even language reflects this connection. Human cultures repeatedly use plant metaphors to describe memory, grief, growth, family, and time. People speak of roots, branches, blooming, withering, turning over a new leaf. Family trees map generations through botanical imagery. The rings of a tree become symbols of accumulated experience. Perhaps these metaphors endure because plant life mirrors aspects of human existence in subtle ways. Seasons resemble emotional cycles. Dormancy resembles recovery. Growth requires conditions that cannot always be forced. Damage leaves marks, yet life continues around them. There is comfort in observing organisms that endure difficulty without panic. After wildfires pass through certain forests, the landscape may initially appear devastated. Blackened trunks, ash-covered ground, silence where birds once moved, yet beneath the soil, seeds already wait. Nutrients released by fire enrich the earth. Sunlight reaches spaces once shaded by dense canopy. Months later, green shoots begin appearing through the ash. Nature does not deny destruction. But neither does it end there, and this quiet persistence exists almost everywhere plants grow. Tiny mosses return across burned stone, ferns unfurl beside fallen trees, vines climb abandoned walls. Life resumes carefully, patiently, without announcement. The forest never truly stops becoming. Even in winter, when forests appear asleep beneath snow and pale skies, enormous processes continue hidden from view. Sap still moves slowly within certain trees. Roots remain alive beneath frozen ground, insulated by layers of soil and fallen leaves. Seeds rest in suspended states awaiting warmth. Beneath the apparent stillness of winter landscapes, life is conserving energy rather than disappearing. Snow itself becomes part of the ecosystem. It protects delicate roots from extreme temperature fluctuations. It stores water that will later feed rivers and forests during spring thaw. Animal tracks cross silent clearings while branches hold crystalline layers of ice that glimmer faintly beneath moonlight. There is a special kind of quiet in winter forests unlike any other environment. Sound becomes softened, air feels sharper, cleaner. Bare branches reveal structures hidden all summer beneath dense leaves. The architecture of trees emerges fully visible against the sky, and each species carries its own design. Some spread outward in wide, twisting forms shaped by open sunlight. Others rise tall and narrow through crowded forests, where vertical growth determines survival. The branching patterns of trees are not random. They reflect mathematics, resource distribution, mechanical stability, and evolutionary history all at once. Leonardo da Vinci once observed that the combined thickness of a tree's branches tends to remain consistent as they divide outward from the trunk. Modern studies confirmed similar scaling principles across many plant systems. Nature repeatedly organizes complexity through elegant underlying rules. 6. In spring, forests awaken gradually rather than all at once. Daylight lengthens, soil temperatures rise, tiny chemical changes inside buds trigger the release of tightly folded leaves prepared months earlier during the previous growing season. Birds return, insects emerge, streams swell with melting snow. Then, almost suddenly, entire landscapes turn green. This seasonal transformation has shaped human psychology for thousands of years. Before artificial climate control and electric lighting, human life followed plant rhythms far more closely. Harvest seasons determined survival. Long winters demanded preparation. Spring represented relief and renewed possibility, not as metaphor, but as physical reality. Perhaps traces of that ancient connection still remain inside modern emotional life. Many people experience noticeable changes in mood and energy as seasons shift. The return of green landscapes after winter often brings feelings difficult to explain logically. It feels less like observing change and more like participating in it. Plants synchronize entire ecosystems through timing. Cherry trees bloom within narrow seasonal windows. Grasses seed according to temperature and rainfall. Migrating birds arrive when food sources emerge. Pollinating insects appear alongside flowers evolved to depend upon them. Across forests and fields, biological clocks align through cycles refined over immense stretches of time, and all of this unfolds mostly without central control. No single organism directs the forest. Coordination emerges from countless interactions between climate, sunlight, soil, water, fungi, bacteria, insects, and plants themselves. Complexity organizes gradually from simple relationships repeated continuously. Human beings often search for visible leadership or structure in systems. Forests reveal another possibility: intelligence distributed across networks rather than concentrated in one place. The soil beneath healthy forests contains astonishing diversity. A single teaspoon may hold billions of microorganisms belonging to thousands of species. Bacteria break down organic matter. Fungi transport nutrients. Tiny insects aerate soil through movement. Earthworms reshape underground environments continuously. Much of life's essential activity happens where humans rarely look, and plants depend completely upon this hidden world. Without soil ecosystems recycling nutrients from dead material, forests could not sustain themselves for long. Death feeds future growth continuously. In many ways, plants embody transformation more directly than animals do. Through photosynthesis, they convert light into matter. Through decomposition, they return matter back into ecosystems. A leaf becomes soil. Soil nourishes roots. Roots support future leaves. Nothing remains isolated for very long. Even the carbon inside the human body may once have passed through ancient forests, ocean algae, or grasslands millions of years ago. Atoms cycle endlessly through living systems. The boundary between one organism and another becomes less fixed when viewed across enough time. Plants quietly participate in this planetary exchange every moment. There are forests today where some trees communicate warnings chemically through the air when insects begin feeding on their leaves. Nearby plants respond by increasing defensive compounds before damage spreads. Certain acacia trees, when grazed heavily, release chemicals that signal neighboring trees to produce bitter toxins, discouraging further feeding. To human observers, such behaviors can feel strangely familiar, almost social. Yet plant communication differs profoundly from animal communication. It unfolds chemically, electrically, hormonally, often across slower timescales. A forest does not speak in words, but it does exchange information continuously. Some researchers studying plant electrophysiology have discovered electrical signaling systems moving through tissues in ways somewhat analogous to nervous systems, though fundamentally simpler and structurally different from animal brains. Injury to one part of a plant may trigger electrical changes elsewhere within the organism, coordinating responses across distant tissues. The old image of plants as passive decorative objects has gradually dissolved under modern science. Instead, plants appear deeply aware of their surroundings in ways shaped entirely by their own evolutionary path. They sense light direction with exquisite sensitivity. They detect subtle shifts in gravity. Roots navigate around obstacles while pursuing moisture gradients underground. Climbing plants alter growth patterns depending on contact with nearby surfaces, and they accomplish all this without eyes, ears, muscles, or brains. Nature repeatedly demonstrates that intelligence can emerge through many forms beyond human expectations. There is something calming about this realization. Human beings often experience the world through urgency, conflict, and constant self-conscious thought. Plants exist differently. Their solutions arise through patience, adaptation, cooperation, and gradual persistence across time. A tree does not fear autumn when leaves begin to fall. Dormancy is part of survival. Energy withdraws inward. Life becomes quieter for a while before returning again. Perhaps humans struggle because they often resist cycles that plants accept naturally. In cities, seasons can become blurred beneath artificial lighting and climate-controlled interiors, but forests remain faithful to ancient rhythms. Dawn light reaches leaves. Moisture rises from soil. Flowers bloom according to invisible calendars written partly in sunlight and temperature. And through it all, the earth breathes. Massive forests inhale carbon dioxide and release oxygen across continents. Ocean phytoplankton drift beneath sunlight, generating enormous portions of the atmosphere humans depend upon daily without noticing. Every breath connects animal life to photosynthesis in an intimate exchange occurring continuously across the planet. Plants are not background scenery for life on Earth. They are the foundation beneath nearly everything. Yet, despite this, their presence often feels gentle rather than dominant. Grass bends beneath footsteps and rises again. Moss spreads silently across fallen stone. Ferns uncurl beside streams in shaded valleys. Wild flowers emerge briefly in cracks between urban pavement. The living world keeps returning softly, persistently, almost tenderly. And maybe this is why people feel drawn toward forests during periods of grief, uncertainty, or exhaustion. Plants offer a kind of reassurance without language, not optimism exactly, something quieter. A reminder that growth continues slowly even after difficult seasons, that life adapts, that damaged landscapes can recover, that stillness itself is not emptiness, but preparation for what comes next. In the deeper layers of a forest, where sunlight arrives only in fragmented pieces and the air remains consistently cool and damp, plant life begins to take on forms that feel almost ancient in their simplicity. Mosses spread across stone like living velvet, requiring nothing more than moisture and shade to persist. Ferns unfurl their delicate fronds in slow spirals that mirror patterns found in shells, storms, and galaxies. Lichens, neither fully plant nor fungus, cling to bark and rock as quiet collaborations between species that have learned to survive together in some of the harshest conditions on Earth. These organisms remind us that life does not always need to be large or fast to endure. In fact, some of the most successful life strategies on the planet are built on slowness and minimalism. A moss patch can survive periods of near-complete dehydration, only to reawaken with rain as if nothing had happened. Lichens can grow on bare stone where almost nothing else can survive, gradually transforming rock into soil over centuries. Even in the absence of obvious movement, these life forms are actively reshaping landscapes at a geological pace. The forest floor, often overlooked, is one of the most dynamic environments on Earth. Each fallen leaf becomes an event. Each decaying branch becomes a small ecosystem. Fungi extend through this world like vast underground architects, breaking down organic matter and redistributing nutrients. Some species form visible mushrooms, but the majority of their structure exists as hidden threads weaving through soil and wood. These fungal networks can span enormous distances, connecting multiple trees and plant species in subtle, continuous exchange. What appears as scattered vegetation above ground may be supported by a shared underground foundation. This hidden connectivity changes the way we understand isolation in nature. A single tree is rarely truly alone. It is part of a broader system of exchange, linked through roots and fungal pathways to other trees, sometimes even of different species. Nutrients, chemical signals, and biological information move through these networks in ways that scientists are still working to fully understand. There is a kind of quiet intelligence in this arrangement, not centralized, not conscious in the human sense, but distributed across relationships. And within this system, older trees often play a stabilizing role. They are not merely taller or larger, they act as reservoirs of stored resources. During periods of stress, some studies suggest that mature trees can support younger saplings by sharing carbon compounds through underground connections. In return, younger trees contribute to the long-term continuity of the forest. It is less a hierarchy and more a slow exchange of mutual dependence. Time behaves differently in such systems. Human perception tends to divide time into moments and milestones, but forests operate on overlapping cycles that extend across decades, centuries, and even millennia. A seed germinates in one season, grows slowly for years, reaches maturity after decades, and then participates in cycles of reproduction that continue long after the original organism has faded. Life in this context is less a single arc, and more a branching continuity. 7. Some forests are so old that they have witnessed entire human histories unfold around them. Trees standing today may have begun their growth before modern cities existed, before industrial landscapes, before written records in some regions. They have experienced weather patterns that no human has directly observed, storms that shaped coastlines, droughts that redefined ecosystems, cycles of abundance and scarcity repeated many times over. In comparison, human lifespans appear brief, almost flickering, yet plants do not seem to interpret time as loss. A tree does not appear to miss previous seasons. It simply continues, adapting its structure as conditions change. When a branch dies, new growth emerges elsewhere. When damage occurs, it is absorbed into the organism's ongoing development, rather than treated as an interruption. There is no final state of completion in a plant's life, only continuation. Even reproduction in plants reflects this quiet philosophy. Seeds are not extensions of memory in a psychological sense, but they are biological continuations of possibility. Each seed contains instructions shaped by countless generations of environmental pressure. When dispersed, they do not carry awareness, yet they carry potential shaped by history. Wind, water, animals, and gravity all participate in distributing this potential across landscapes. A single tree can contribute thousands of seeds over its lifetime, each one representing a small experiment in survival. Most will not grow. Some will fall on unsuitable ground. Others will be eaten or decay. But a few will find the right conditions and continue the lineage forward. This process, repeated endlessly, shapes entire forests, and in certain environments, plants have evolved to maximize the chances of success through remarkable strategies. Some species synchronize flowering events across vast regions, overwhelming herbivores with abundance so that enough seeds survive. Others produce fruits that attract specific animals capable of transporting seeds over long distances. Some even rely on rare environmental triggers like fire or flooding to open pathways for regeneration. Survival is not always about strength. Often, it is about timing. Human beings often interpret nature through the lens of struggle, but plant life suggests something more nuanced. It is not constant battle, but constant adjustment, not resistance alone, but responsiveness. Even in extreme environments, plants find ways to persist. In high mountain regions, where winds are harsh and temperatures fluctuate dramatically, some species grow low to the ground in compact forms that reduce exposure. In Arctic landscapes, certain plants complete their entire reproductive cycle in a single short summer. In salt marshes, specialized plants filter and tolerate saline water that would destroy most life forms. Every environment becomes a set of constraints that life gradually learns to navigate. Over time, these adaptations accumulate into extraordinary diversity. The plant kingdom is one of the most varied expressions of life on Earth, ranging from microscopic algae drifting in oceans to massive trees towering above forests. Yet despite this diversity, all plants share a common reliance on sunlight as their primary energy source. Light becomes the original currency of plant existence. Captured photons drive nearly every process that follows. Growth, reproduction, defense, communication, and survival all depend indirectly on energy harvested from distant stars. In this sense, every green leaf is a small interface between Earth and the Sun. It is difficult to think of anything more quietly elegant, and as night falls again over forests and fields, that relationship pauses but does not end. Leaves stop absorbing light, yet they continue processing energy stored earlier in the day. Stems adjust fluid levels. Roots continue exploring soil in slow, incremental movements. The organism remains alive, even in darkness, simply shifting its mode of existence. The world becomes quieter, but never truly still. Beneath moonlight, plants continue their slow conversation with time, light, and earth, maintaining rhythms that began long before human memory and will likely continue long after it fades. And in that continuity, there is a kind of calm that does not need to be spoken. In the quiet hours before dawn, when most living things are still wrapped in sleep, plants begin a subtle transition that is almost imperceptible to the human eye. The temperature of leaves changes slightly as they prepare for the return of sunlight. Stomata, the microscopic pores on their surfaces, begin to adjust in anticipation. Internal chemical gradients shift in preparation for photosynthesis to resume. Even in darkness, plants seem to anticipate light not as surprise, but as certainty. This rhythm is not learned, it is inherited. Deep within plant cells, internal clocks operate with remarkable consistency. These circadian rhythms persist even when plants are removed from natural light cycles, suggesting an internal timing system refined over millions of years of evolution. In this way, plants do not merely respond to the day, they carry the day within them. As dawn approaches, forests begin to reassemble themselves visually. Shadows soften, the edges of leaves become visible again. Dew clings to grasses in scattered reflections of pale sky. A stillness remains. But it is no longer the stillness of night. It is the quiet preparation for movement, growth, and light. When sunlight finally arrives, it does not simply illuminate the forest. It activates it. Photons strike leaves and immediately set off biochemical reactions that have been waiting in suspension through the night. Water molecules begin moving upward through vascular systems again. Carbon dioxide is drawn inward. Sugars begin forming. The entire forest resumes its metabolic activity in a coordinated response that spans countless individual organisms, all reacting simultaneously to the same distant star. It is difficult to fully appreciate how unified this response is. Across vast distances, from dense tropical jungles to quiet temperate woodlands, plants begin their daily cycle of energy conversion almost in rhythm with one another, not because they communicate directly in any conscious sense, but because they share the same environmental signals. Light becomes a shared language. 7. As the day unfolds, forests enter a phase of productivity that is both relentless and silent. Leaves angle themselves toward optimal sunlight exposure. Some plants track the sun's movement across the sky, adjusting their orientation slowly throughout the day. In dense environments, competition for light becomes visible in the shapes of growth itself: taller stems, broader leaves, twisting vines reaching toward openings in the canopy. Yet even this competition maintains a strange sense of balance. No single plant dominates indefinitely. Sunlight shifts, seasons change, storms rearrange structures. A tree that grows too aggressively may eventually shade its own lower branches. A vine that reaches too far may collapse under its own weight. Forests continuously self-adjust through a combination of growth and limitation. In this way, stability emerges not from rigidity, but from constant change. There is also a quieter dimension to plant life that becomes more apparent when observing closely: sensitivity to touch. Some plants respond dramatically to physical contact. Leaves fold inward when brushed. Stems curl around supports they encounter. In certain species, even slight vibrations can trigger movement. One of the most well-known examples is a plant that reacts visibly within seconds of being touched, folding its leaves inward as if retreating. This movement is not consciousness, but a rapid redistribution of internal water pressure within specialized cells. Still, the effect can feel strangely responsive, almost aware. Other plants respond more slowly but no less precisely. Climbing species can detect nearby structures and gradually alter growth direction toward them. Roots probe through soil, changing course when they encounter resistance or chemical signals indicating nutrients or competing organisms. The underground world is especially rich in this kind of subtle interaction. Beneath the surface, roots navigate a dense environment filled with obstacles, microbial life, moisture gradients, and chemical cues. They do not move through space in the way animals do. Instead, they grow into space, extending themselves gradually in response to conditions they encounter. In this sense, movement in plants is growth made visible over time. Some root systems span astonishing distances, forming networks that stabilize entire landscapes. They anchor soil against erosion, regulate water flow, and maintain ecological balance in ways that often go unnoticed until disruption occurs. When forests are removed, the absence of roots becomes visible not immediately, but through consequences that unfold over time. Flooding, soil loss, reduced rainfall, and shifting microclimates. What seemed like a static collection of trees is revealed to have been an active stabilizing system. Plants do not merely occupy environments, they structure them, and as the day continues, energy captured in leaves is distributed throughout the organism. Sugars travel downward into stems and roots, where they are stored or used for growth. Some of this energy is reserved for future seasons, carefully accumulated in anticipation of winter or drought. Plants live not only in the present moment, but in extended preparation for future conditions. This temporal extension gives plant life a unique relationship with uncertainty. Where animals often respond to immediate threats or opportunities, plants prepare gradually for possible futures that may or may not arrive. Their strategies are built around probability, storage, and resilience, rather than rapid reaction. Even reproduction reflects this long horizon. Flowering events may depend on accumulated energy over multiple years. Seed production may occur only when conditions reach a precise balance of resources, temperature, and environmental stability. Nothing in a plant's life is rushed, yet nothing is random either. As sunlight shifts again toward late afternoon, shadows lengthen across the forest floor. The pace of photosynthesis begins to slow slightly. Leaves adjust once more, tracking the changing angle of light. The day begins its gradual transition toward evening, and throughout this entire cycle, something quietly constant remains: the exchange between plant life and atmosphere. Every breath of wind moving through leaves carries moisture, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and microscopic particles of life. Forests continuously exchange matter with the air above them. They influence humidity, temperature, and even cloud formation over large regions. In some ecosystems, this exchange is so significant that forests help generate their own rainfall patterns. The boundary between forest and sky is not fixed. It is porous, dynamic, and constantly shifting. By evening, the forest begins to soften again. Light becomes warmer and lower. Activity slows, though it does not stop. plants continue internal transport processes. Energy redistribution continues. Growth processes often intensify again after sunset in some species, as if the absence of direct sunlight allows different forms of activity to take priority. The day in a forest is not a cycle of simple rest and activity. It is a continuous transformation with changing emphasis, and as darkness gradually returns, the forest does not become inactive. It simply shifts into another mode of existence, one shaped by conservation, subtle movement, and preparation for the next arrival of light. Above all, what remains constant is continuity, a rhythm that does not break, only changes form, and within that rhythm, plants continue their quiet work, sustaining the atmosphere, shaping landscapes, and holding together the conditions that make life on Earth possible at all. As night settles fully over the landscape, the forest does not simply become dark. It becomes layered in a different way. Shapes lose their sharpness, but depth increases. Sound travels farther. Moisture gathers again on leaves and bark. The air cools slowly, allowing subtle movements of vapor and scent to drift through still spaces. In this darkness, plants enter a quieter phase that is often mistaken for inactivity, yet continues a complex set of internal processes. Some species redistribute nutrients accumulated during the day. Others repair microscopic damage in their tissues caused by sunlight, wind, or herbivory. Cellular maintenance continues at a steady pace, ensuring that structures remain functional for the next cycle of light. Even without photosynthesis, plants are far from idle. They are maintaining, adjusting, conserving, and preparing. There is a kind of invisible continuity to this work, one that rarely announces itself outwardly. In tropical forests, where night remains warm and humid, the soundscape becomes especially rich. Insects call in layered rhythms. Amphibians respond from hidden pools. Occasional wind moves through upper canopies like a slow shifting tide. Beneath all of this, plant life continues exchanging gases with the atmosphere, releasing moisture and absorbing what it needs from the surrounding air and soil. The forest at night feels less like a place that has stopped working, and more like a system operating in a different frequency. Sixth, one of the most fascinating aspects of plant life is that much of its communication and coordination happens without any visible signal. Chemical messages drift through air and soil. Root exudates alter the microbial environment around them. Fungal networks transmit nutrients and molecular cues between distant plants. These exchanges do not resemble speech or sound. They resemble chemistry moving through space over time. And yet, despite their subtlety, these signals can shape entire ecosystems. A plant under insect attack may release volatile compounds into the air that nearby plants detect, triggering defensive responses before damage even reaches them. Some trees alter the chemical composition of their leaves in anticipation of grazing pressure. Others adjust growth patterns based on the presence of competing roots nearby. This creates a kind of environmental awareness distributed across the landscape. Not awareness in the human sense of thought or reflection, but responsiveness woven into structure itself. Over long periods, this responsiveness shapes the architecture of entire forests. Tree spacing, canopy density, root distribution, and species composition all emerge through countless small interactions layered over decades. What looks like a static forest from a distance is, in reality, the outcome of continuous negotiation between living systems and their environment. Even disturbances become part of this ongoing structure. Storms, fires, floods, and droughts do not simply destroy forests, they reorganize them. A fallen tree opens a gap in the canopy, allowing sunlight to reach the forest floor for the first time in decades. This sudden change triggers a cascade of growth among seedlings waiting in the shadows. Species composition may shift, new patterns emerge. Over time, the forest adapts to its altered conditions. Destruction, in this sense, is not an endpoint but a form of transformation. Some of the oldest ecological systems on Earth are defined by this long relationship with disturbance. Fire-adapted forests depend on periodic burns to clear undergrowth and release nutrients. Floodplain forests evolve alongside shifting rivers, Coastal plant communities adjust continuously to changing tides and salt levels. Stability in nature often comes from repeated change rather than resistance to it. Even human-altered environments eventually become part of this cycle. Abandoned fields begin returning to grass. Shrubs follow. Trees slowly re-establish themselves. In time, forests can reclaim spaces that once seemed permanently transformed by human activity. The process is slow, but it is persistent. Plants rarely rush, but they also rarely stop. There is also something profoundly subtle about how plants shape human perception of time. When people spend extended periods in natural environments, especially among trees, their sense of urgency often begins to soften. Attention shifts from immediate concerns toward broader patterns, weather changes, seasonal transitions, gradual growth. This shift is not purely psychological in isolation. It is partly a response to encountering life forms that operate on entirely different temporal scales. A tree does not respond to messages. It responds to seasons. A flower does not track minutes. It tracks sunlight. A forest does not organize itself around schedules. It organizes itself around cycles that repeat with slight variation year after year. In contrast, human life often compresses time into fragmented units: hours, deadlines, notifications. The presence of plants introduces a different rhythm, one that is continuous rather than segmented, and this difference can feel strangely grounding. Even a single potted plant in a room can subtly alter the atmosphere of a space. It introduces a living system that changes gradually, independent of digital or mechanical timing. New leaves appear without announcement. Old leaves fade naturally. Growth happens in ways that require observation over time rather than immediate attention. This encourages a different kind of awareness, less reactive, more observational. In many ways, plants teach attention without instruction. There is no urgency in their presence, yet they continually invite noticing. The curl of a leaf, the angle of a stem toward light, the slow opening of a bud that has been forming for days or weeks. These changes are easy to miss if one is not looking closely, yet they are always occurring. Time in the plant world is not absent. It is simply distributed differently. Even geological time is embedded within plant life. Fossilized forests reveal ancient ecosystems preserved in stone, where once living trees now exist as mineral traces of their former structures. Coal beds formed from compressed plant material over millions of years remind us that entire landscapes of vegetation have come and gone repeatedly across Earth's history. What exists today is only a single moment in a much longer sequence. And yet, despite this vast timescale, plants remain immediately present. A blade of grass bending in wind is not separate from ancient forests or future ecosystems. It is part of the same continuous lineage of photosynthetic life, extending backward and forward across time. As night deepens further, the forest reaches its quietest point. Temperature stabilizes. Movement becomes minimal. Even wind often slows. But beneath this apparent stillness, countless processes continue. Slow chemical exchanges, cellular repair, root adjustments, fungal transport, and atmospheric interaction. The world has not paused. It has simply shifted into a form where change is less visible. And in that hidden continuity, plants remain steadily present, holding together the living structure of the planet in ways both subtle and essential, carrying forward the same quiet rhythm that has persisted since the earliest beginnings of life on Earth. Deep within that quiet continuity, something even more subtle unfolds, an ongoing negotiation between plants and the invisible forces that surround them. Light, gravity, water, and time are not merely conditions in which plants exist. They are forces that plants actively interpret and respond to, shaping growth in ways that are both precise and adaptive. Gravity, for example, is not experienced passively. Roots consistently grow downward, regardless of orientation, while stems typically grow upward, even if a seed is rotated or displaced. This directional behavior is not conscious, yet it is remarkably consistent across nearly all plant species. Inside cells, specialized structures detect gravitational pull and redistribute growth hormones accordingly. guiding development over time. The result is a silent alignment with the structure of the planet itself. Water, too, shapes plant life in equally profound ways. Roots do not simply extend randomly through soil. They follow gradients of moisture, adjusting direction based on subtle differences in water availability. In dry environments, this search becomes more intense, more dispersed, as roots explore wider areas in pursuit of scarce resources. In wetter environments, growth can be more concentrated and efficient. This constant responsiveness gives the impression of awareness, though it arises from distributed biochemical processes rather than centralized cognition. Still, the effect is the same. Plants remain continuously in dialogue with their surroundings. 8. With a fee. One of the most remarkable aspects of plant life is how it transforms environmental constraint into form. In open landscapes, trees expand broadly to capture maximum sunlight. In dense forests, they grow tall and narrow, competing for vertical access to light. In windy coastal regions, they may bend permanently in response to prevailing air currents, their trunks shaped over decades by invisible pressure. What appears as diversity of form is often a record of environmental history. A tree is not just growing in a place. It is shaped by that place over time. This relationship becomes even more intricate when considering symbiosis. Plants rarely exist in isolation. Fungi connect their roots into vast underground networks, exchanging nutrients and chemical signals across multiple species. In return for sugars produced through photosynthesis, fungi supply minerals and water that would otherwise be difficult to access. This exchange forms one of the oldest partnerships on Earth. It is believed that early plants could not have colonized land without these fungal relationships. What began as a survival strategy became a foundational structure for terrestrial ecosystems. Even today, much of a forest's stability depends on these invisible collaborations beneath the soil. The visible forest is only part of the system. Beneath it lies another forest, one of threads, exchanges, and slow communication. Within this underground network, information flows in ways that challenge simple definitions of individuality. Nutrients may move from one plant to another depending on seasonal needs. Chemical signals may spread warnings of environmental stress. In some cases, older plants appear to support younger ones, creating continuity across generations. This does not imply intention in a human sense. Rather, it reflects the cumulative outcome of evolutionary relationships that have persisted for hundreds of millions of years. Over time, these relationships shape entire landscapes. Forests are not random assemblages of plants. They are structured systems influenced by soil composition, climate, disturbance patterns, and biological interaction. Even the spacing between trees often reflects long-term competition and cooperation occurring beneath the surface. When viewed at large scale, forests resemble living mosaics, constantly adjusting, never fully static. And yet, from a human perspective, they often appear still. This contrast between perception and reality is central to how plants are experienced. Human senses are tuned to detect rapid change. Movement, sound, and sudden variation attract attention. Plants operate outside this range of immediacy. Their changes are gradual, distributed, and often only visible when compared across time. A tree photographed today and again in 10 years reveals transformation that would otherwise go unnoticed day by day. Time-lapse studies make this visible. Flowers opening in seconds, vines extending across surfaces, forest canopies shifting with seasonal cycles. What appears slow in real time becomes dynamic when compressed. But even without acceleration, plants are always in motion. It is simply motion spread across longer intervals. As night continues, metabolic activity within plants gradually shifts again. Some species reduce water loss by closing stomata. Others continue minimal respiration to maintain cellular function. Energy stored during the day is carefully allocated for maintenance and growth. There is no true pause in life, only redistribution of effort. Even fallen leaves continue participating in ecological processes. They decompose slowly, feeding microbial communities that in turn nourish future plant growth. Nutrients cycle upward and downward through systems that rarely remain in one state for long. Life and decay are intertwined phases of the same continuous loop. This looping structure extends beyond individual plants to entire ecosystems. A forest is not a fixed entity but a process, one that changes composition gradually while maintaining overall continuity. Species appear and disappear, climate shifts, disturbances occur, yet the system persists through adaptation rather than permanence. Some forests today are the result of thousands of years of uninterrupted regeneration, following ancient disturbances no longer visible in landscape form. In this sense, every forest is both ancient and current at the same time. Human perception often separates past, present, and future into distinct categories, but plant systems blur these divisions. Seeds carry genetic memory of past conditions. Growth responds to present environments. Structures are built in preparation for future seasons. All three dimensions of time coexist within a single organism, and as dawn eventually approaches again beyond the edge of night, this continuity becomes visible once more in subtle ways. Dew forms, air begins to warm, light slowly returns to the canopy. The forest does not restart, it simply continues. What changes is not life itself, but the visibility of its processes. And so, beneath shifting cycles of light and darkness, plants remain steady participants in a planetary rhythm far older than human observation, sustaining the conditions in which all complex life continues to exist, quietly, persistently, and without interruption. As light returns once more to the forest, it does not arrive as a sudden event, but as a gradual unfolding across layers of atmosphere, leaves, and moisture. The upper canopy is often the first to respond, catching faint illumination long before it reaches the forest floor. From above, the treetops appear almost to breathe with the changing sky, shifting from deep shadow into muted green and gold. Below, the understory remains in partial twilight for longer. Here, plants adapted to low light continue their quiet strategies of survival, making use of every fragment of sunlight that filters downward. Some leaves are structured like thin solar panels, angled precisely to capture scattered rays. Others are broader and darker, optimized to absorb minimal light over extended periods. In these layered environments, light becomes a resource distributed unevenly through space and time, and plants respond accordingly. A forest is often described as a vertical ecosystem, not because it grows upward alone, but because life is arranged in stacked relationships. The canopy, understory, shrub layer, forest floor, all exist simultaneously, each with distinct conditions and specialized plant life adapted to those conditions. This vertical complexity creates microclimates within a single landscape. A patch of ground just a few meters away may experience entirely different humidity, temperature, and light exposure. Plants respond to these differences with extraordinary sensitivity, adjusting growth patterns in ways that reflect local conditions rather than generalized environments. Over time, this produces a finely tuned ecological mosaic. 7. One of the most subtle yet powerful forces shaping plant life is competition for light. In dense forests, where sunlight is limited, even small differences in height can determine survival. A seedling growing just slightly taller than its neighbors may gain access to enough light to thrive, while those below it remain in shadow. But this competition does not always lead to uniform dominance. Many plants evolve strategies that prioritize endurance over speed. Some grow slowly but steadily for decades, waiting for canopy openings created by fallen trees. Others adapt to survive long periods in deep shade, maintaining minimal metabolic activity until conditions improve. This long patience is one of the defining characteristics of forest ecosystems. A single fallen tree can reshape this balance instantly. When a large canopy tree dies and collapses, it creates a gap in the forest roof. Sunlight floods downward for the first time in years or decades. The forest floor, once dim and quiet, suddenly becomes a site of rapid growth and transformation. Seeds that have remained dormant respond quickly. Saplings accelerate upward growth. Vines spread aggressively toward new light. Competing plants enter a brief period of intense activity that gradually stabilizes again as the canopy closes. The forest reorganizes itself without ever leaving its place. This cycle of disturbance and renewal is fundamental to many ecosystems. Storms, fires, floods, and even insect outbreaks all contribute to periodic restructuring. What may appear destructive at first often becomes the foundation for new growth. In this sense, ecosystems do not simply recover from disturbance, they evolve through it. Plants are uniquely adapted to this rhythm because their survival strategies are inherently flexible. Unlike animals, they cannot relocate when conditions change. Instead, they must respond in place, adjusting growth patterns, chemical defenses, and reproductive timing to match environmental shifts. This immobility has shaped an entirely different form of life strategy. Where animals often rely on movement, plants rely on transformation. Even the internal structure of plants reflects this adaptability. Cells remain capable of differentiation throughout much of a plant's life, allowing growth to continue in multiple directions simultaneously. New branches, roots, leaves, and reproductive structures can form as needed, depending on environmental conditions. This plasticity allows plants to remain responsive across long timescales. In the soil beneath these forests, another world continues its work without interruption. Microorganisms decompose organic matter, breaking it down into simpler compounds that can be reused by living plants. Fungi extend their networks, transporting nutrients across distances that would otherwise isolate individual organisms. The soil is not inert. It is alive with constant transformation, and plants depend entirely on this hidden activity. Without decomposition, forests would eventually become locked in their own waste. Nutrients would remain trapped in dead material, unavailable for new growth. It is through microbial and fungal activity that ecosystems remain in motion, continuously recycling the materials of life. In this way, even decay becomes a form of continuation. As daylight strengthens further, photosynthetic activity increases across the forest. Leaves absorb light energy and convert it into chemical bonds that fuel growth and maintenance. Oxygen is released as a byproduct, quietly enriching the atmosphere. This process occurs billions of times per second across the planet. Every green surface participates in this global exchange. From distant grasslands to dense tropical forests to microscopic algae in the oceans, plant life collectively regulates the composition of Earth's atmosphere. The oxygen that fills human lungs is not static. It is continuously produced, maintained, and balanced by living systems. The planet breathes through plants, and this breath has been ongoing for hundreds of millions of years. Even climates are shaped in part by this biological activity. Forests influence rainfall patterns by releasing water vapor into the air through transpiration. Large forested regions can generate their own localized weather systems, affecting cloud formation and precipitation far beyond their boundaries. In this sense, plants are not only inhabitants of Earth's environment, they are participants in its climate system. As the day progresses, forests enter a familiar rhythm. Energy flows upward through leaves, downward through roots, and outward through chemical signals. Growth continues at varying speeds depending on species, age, and environmental conditions. Some plants expand visibly within hours, while others change so slowly that their transformation is only measurable across seasons. Yet beneath these differences, the same fundamental processes continue. Light is captured, water is transported, nutrients are exchanged, structures are maintained, energy is stored, and through it all, the forest remains in motion, even when no movement is immediately visible. As afternoon light begins to soften, shadows lengthen once again. The intensity of photosynthesis gradually shifts. The forest prepares, as it always does, for another transition toward evening. There is no final state in this cycle, only continuous change shaped by repetition. And in that repetition lies a quiet form of stability, one that does not resist time, but moves with it, unfolding slowly, steadily, and without interruption through every passing day. As evening approaches again, the forest begins its familiar transformation, though nothing in it ever truly repeats in exactly the same way. The light is similar but not identical. The air carries echoes of earlier warmth, yet cools in slightly different patterns depending on soil moisture, wind direction, and the heat stored in leaves and stone throughout the day. Plants respond to these subtle differences with quiet precision. The closing of the day is not a shutdown, but a redistribution. Energy that was actively captured and processed in daylight is gradually stored, moved, and stabilized within plant structures. Sugars produced through photosynthesis are transported into roots, stems, and developing tissues. Some are stored as reserves for growth in future seasons. Others are used immediately for maintenance and cellular repair. The forest prepares not for rest, but for continuity. Even as visible activity slows, internal processes remain steady. Water continues to move through vascular systems. Nutrients are redistributed. Cells maintain structural integrity. In some species, growth does not stop at night, but shifts into different forms, prioritizing root expansion or structural strengthening rather than leaf development. The idea of plants resting is therefore misleading. What appears as stillness is actually a change in focus, and as darkness deepens, a different kind of forest emerges. The outlines of trees dissolve into shadow. Depth becomes harder to perceive visually, yet more apparent through sound and scent. Night air carries more moisture, allowing aromas from leaves, soil, and bark to travel further. The forest becomes less visual and more atmospheric. It is in this atmosphere that plants continue their quiet existence. 4. One of the most overlooked aspects of plant life is how deeply it is tied to invisible cycles in the environment. Temperature fluctuations between day and night influence enzyme activity within cells. Humidity affects water transport efficiency. Even subtle changes in atmospheric pressure can alter how gases move through plant tissues. Plants are constantly reading their surroundings through physical and chemical gradients. This responsiveness extends into the soil as well. Roots do not simply anchor plants in place. They explore, sense, and adjust their growth based on chemical signals from microbes, minerals, and nearby organisms. In many ways, the soil functions as an extension of the plant's sensory environment. It is not just ground. It is information. Within this underground world, fungi continue their slow and intricate work. Their networks connect distant plants, moving nutrients through threads that spread beneath entire ecosystems. These fungal structures respond to changes in moisture, temperature, and available organic material, continuously reorganizing themselves in response to shifting conditions. The forest floor, though unseen, is in constant motion. As night progresses, some plants shift into protective modes. Stomata close to reduce water loss. Certain leaves reposition slightly to minimize exposure to cold air. Protective compounds accumulate in tissues to guard against herbivores and microbial threats that become more active in darkness. Even defense is a continuous process. Insects, too, remain active through the night, feeding on leaves, pollinating nocturnal flowers, or decomposing organic matter. Plants respond to these interactions not with immediate reaction, but through slow chemical adjustments that influence future growth and resilience. Nothing is isolated. Every interaction becomes part of a larger pattern. Over long periods, these patterns shape entire ecosystems. A plant species that is frequently grazed may develop stronger chemical defenses over generations. Another may evolve faster regrowth after damage. Some may specialize in growing in areas where herbivory is lower, while others thrive precisely in disturbed environments where competition is reduced. Evolution in plant life is not sudden. It is cumulative adjustment across vast stretches of time, and yet, despite this long history of change, the present moment in a forest often feels remarkably stable. This stability is an illusion created by continuity. The forest appears unchanged because its changes are distributed across scales too large or too small for immediate perception. A leaf unfolding overnight, a root extending a few millimeters deeper into soil, a fungal thread branching outward beneath the ground, a seed germinating after years of dormancy. Each of these events is minor on its own. Together they define the forest. In many ways, plants teach a different understanding of significance. Importance is not measured in speed or visibility, but in persistence and contribution over time. A slow change repeated consistently becomes a force capable of shaping entire landscapes. Human civilizations, too, are influenced by this principle, even if indirectly. Agriculture, for example, is built entirely on plant cycles, the timing of planting and harvest, the selection of crops, the management of soil fertility, all depend on understanding and aligning with plant life. Without plants, human history would not have developed in its current form. Grains such as wheat, rice, and maize became foundational to civilizations across continents. Their cultivation required close observation of seasonal patterns, rainfall cycles, and soil behavior. Early societies built calendars, settlements, and trade systems around agricultural rhythms. In this sense, plants helped structure human time. Even today, global systems remain deeply connected to plant life. Food production, forestry, medicine, textiles, and even atmospheric stability depend on ongoing biological processes that operate largely outside of human control. Despite technological advancement, this dependency has not diminished. It has simply become less visible. As night reaches its deepest point, the forest enters a phase of minimal external activity. Yet internally, systems continue to maintain equilibrium. Cells repair themselves, energy reserves are balanced, structural integrity is preserved, growth pauses in some areas and continues in others. Life is redistributed rather than halted. Above the canopy, the sky shifts again. Stars appear through gaps in branches. Moonlight filters downward in faint, scattered patterns. The forest is not illuminated evenly, but in fragments, small pools of visibility surrounded by deep shadow. Within this dim world, plants continue their long existence without interruption. There is no expectation of completion, no final goal, no moment of arrival. Only ongoing participation in cycles that extend far beyond any single organism. And as the night settles into its quietest hour, the forest remains what it has always been. A living system sustained by light remembered in leaves, by water moving through hidden channels, by roots exploring darkness beneath the soil, and by countless interactions unfolding slowly across time. Nothing is finished. Nothing is paused. Everything continues. Before the first light of morning returns, there is a brief interval in the forest that feels almost suspended. Not empty, not inactive, but held in a kind of equilibrium where the boundary between night and day is not yet defined. Temperature is at its lowest point. Moisture settles heavily on every surface. The air is still, but not lifeless. In this threshold, plants exist in their most balanced state between two worlds. Metabolism continues quietly within cells, maintaining the integrity of tissues that have endured a full cycle of light and darkness. Energy reserves accumulated during the previous day are carefully allocated to essential processes. Nothing is wasted, nothing is accelerated beyond necessity. Every function operates within narrow limits shaped by millions of years of evolutionary refinement. This is not dormancy. It is precision. Even the faintest changes in environmental conditions begin to register within plant systems. A slight increase in atmospheric temperature can alter internal water movement. A subtle shift in humidity can influence gas exchange. These adjustments occur without conscious awareness, yet they are continuous and finely tuned. Plants live within gradients, not boundaries, and as dawn approaches once more, these gradients begin to shift again. Light does not arrive uniformly. It moves across the landscape in waves, first touching the highest branches, then filtering downward through layers of leaves, gradually dissolving the remnants of night. With this return of illumination, plant life transitions once again into active energy capture. The cycle continues, as it always has. 5 gaug. Yet nothing about this repetition is truly identical. Each day introduces slight variations in temperature, moisture, atmospheric composition, and biological response. Over time, these small differences accumulate, shaping growth patterns that are never perfectly repeated. A forest is not cyclical in a closed sense. It is cyclical with variation. This subtle variation is what allows ecosystems to remain dynamic across centuries. If every cycle were identical, adaptation would stall. Instead, each return of daylight introduces new conditions that plants must interpret and respond to. In this way, time becomes a creative force. Within plant tissues, biochemical processes resume with increasing intensity. Chloroplasts activate, capturing photons and converting them into chemical energy. Water transport systems increase flow to support photosynthetic demand. Stomata adjust to balance carbon intake with water conservation. These processes are so finely coordinated that they occur across entire forests simultaneously, yet independently within each organism. There is no central command, only shared conditions. As morning progresses, the forest gradually becomes more structurally visible again. Shapes sharpen, colors deepen. The subtle distinctions between species become clearer. What was once a unified silhouette of darkness resolves again into a complex arrangement of individual forms. But even this clarity is temporary. As sunlight intensifies, new variations in temperature and light exposure begin to reshape the environment once more. Some areas become warmer than others depending on canopy density. Wind patterns shift as air rises and moves through openings in the forest structure. Plants respond continuously to this evolving landscape. A leaf may adjust its angle slightly to reduce excessive light exposure. A stem may orient itself toward a more favorable gap in the canopy. Roots may alter growth direction based on changing soil moisture after overnight condensation and evaporation cycles. These adjustments are small but constant, and over time they accumulate into the visible architecture of the forest. In dense ecosystems, this slow shaping becomes especially evident. Trees do not grow in isolation. They grow in response to neighbors, competition, and cooperation simultaneously. Branches bend away from shaded regions and toward open light. Roots avoid obstacles while pursuing resources. Entire growth patterns are influenced by surrounding vegetation. The forest becomes a collective structure formed through individual responses. It is neither planned nor random. It emerges. Beneath this visible structure, underground processes continue without interruption. Fungal networks remain active, redistributing nutrients and maintaining connections between plants. Microorganisms in the soil continue decomposition, breaking down organic matter into usable compounds. These processes ensure that nothing in the system remains static for long. Even stability requires motion. In many ways, the forest is defined not by any single organism, but by the relationships between them. Plants, fungi, bacteria, insects, animals, water, air, and sunlight form an interconnected system where each component influences the others continuously. Remove one element, and the entire structure shifts. This interconnectedness extends beyond immediate ecological function. It influences long-term evolutionary trajectories. Species adapt not only to climate and geography, but also to the presence and behavior of other organisms within the same environment. Evolution is therefore not solitary. It is relational. As the day advances, energy captured through photosynthesis is distributed throughout plant systems. Some is used immediately for growth, some is stored for later use, some support structural maintenance. This allocation varies depending on species, age, and environmental conditions. Yet across all variations, the principle remains consistent. Efficiency shaped by necessity. Plants do not store energy indiscriminately. They manage it with remarkable precision, balancing immediate needs with long-term survival strategies. This long-term orientation is one of the most distinctive aspects of plant life. While animals often prioritize immediate response, plants operate across extended temporal horizons. A decision made today may influence growth patterns months or even years into the future. A tree growing slowly in shade may be preparing for a future opening in the canopy that does not yet exist. A seed may remain dormant for years until conditions align precisely for germination. Time is not a constraint for plants in the same way it is for animals. It is a medium through which they operate. And as midday approaches, the forest reaches another peak of activity. Photosynthesis is at its highest intensity. Gas exchange between leaves and atmosphere increases. Water transport systems operate at full capacity. Growth processes accelerate where conditions allow. Yet even at this peak, Nothing feels rushed. Everything remains measured, distributed, and balanced. The forest continues its quiet transformation under light that has traveled millions of kilometers to reach it, converting energy into structure, structure into stability, and stability into continued life. And through this ongoing exchange, the planet itself remains alive in a form that is both ancient and continuously renewed, held together by the slow, steady work of plants that never stop becoming what they are. As the afternoon light begins its gradual descent, the forest enters a phase that feels less like activity and more like refinement. The intensity of sunlight softens, angles shift, and shadows slowly stretch across the ground in elongated patterns. This is a time when plants begin to redistribute the energy they have collected throughout the day, converting abundance into stability. What has been captured is now being organized. Inside leaves, sugars produced through photosynthesis are transported through phloem networks to regions of growth and storage. Some of this energy strengthens stems and roots, some is directed toward developing buds that will not open for weeks, months, or even an entire seasonal cycle. Plants are always working ahead of the present moment, preparing structures that will only become visible in the future. There is a quiet foresight embedded in their biology. Even as light fades, biochemical processes continue adjusting internal balances. Enzyme activity shifts with temperature. Water movement responds to evaporation rates. Gas exchange slows slightly as stomata begin to prepare for evening closure. These transitions are not abrupt. They unfold gradually, in layers of response that mirror the changing environment. The forest does not switch states. It transitions through gradients. 4. As the day moves further toward evening, one of the most subtle yet important processes in plant life becomes more apparent: preparation for metabolic slowdown. While plants never fully stop functioning, they do adjust their internal priorities based on the availability of light. Without sunlight, photosynthesis ceases, but respiration continues. This means that plants must carefully manage the energy produced during the day to sustain themselves through the night. The balance between storage and consumption becomes essential for survival. This daily rhythm, repeated endlessly, shapes not only individual plants but entire ecosystems. In forests, the timing of these transitions is synchronized not through communication in the human sense, but through shared environmental signals. Light intensity, temperature change, and atmospheric humidity act as universal cues that trigger similar responses across thousands of organisms simultaneously. It is coordination without instruction, and as evening deepens, this coordination becomes more visible in behavior. Flowers that opened during daylight may begin to close, leaves subtly reposition to reduce exposure to cooling air. Some plants shift internal fluids to protect delicate tissues from nighttime temperature drops. The forest begins to simplify its outward expression while maintaining internal complexity. Insects respond to this transition as well. Diurnal species retreat, while nocturnal species become more active. Pollination patterns shift accordingly. Some plants release stronger fragrances at night, attracting specific pollinators adapted to darkness. Others rely on wind or passive mechanisms, continuing their reproductive cycles without reliance on animal movement. Even reproduction is shaped by time. Within soil, fungal networks continue their steady work without interruption. These systems do not depend on light and therefore maintain continuity across the full day-night cycle. Nutrients are exchanged, redistributed, and buffered through these networks, ensuring that plants remain connected even when above-ground activity slows. In many ways, the soil becomes the forest's memory. It stores the results of decomposition, growth, and interaction over long periods. Fallen leaves, decayed roots, and organic material from countless organisms are gradually transformed into forms that can be reused by living plants. Nothing is truly lost. It is only reshaped. This continuous recycling is one of the defining characteristics of plant-dominated ecosystems. As twilight approaches, color begins to change again. The greens of leaves deepen. Warm tones from the setting sun reflect softly across surfaces. The forest takes on a muted palette, not because it is becoming less alive, but because light itself is changing. Perception is shaped as much by environment as by organism. Within this shifting light, textures become more pronounced. Bark appears rougher, moss appears denser, leaves appear more layered. The forest becomes less about brightness and more about depth, and in this depth, subtle movements continue. Branches adjust slightly in response to wind. Leaves reposition in small increments. Water continues its upward and downward transport within vascular systems. Growth does not stop entirely, but it slows, becoming more localized in roots or protected tissues. The forest never fully pauses. It only redistributes effort. As night finally begins to settle, temperature drops again. Moisture condenses on surfaces. The air becomes stiller. Light fades until only faint traces remain beneath the canopy. Yet even here, life persists. Plants maintain internal regulation through chemical signaling and energy management. Cells repair damage accumulated during daylight. Nutrients continue circulating at reduced rates. Structural stability is preserved through constant microscopic adjustments. There is no separation between activity and rest in a strict sense, only variation in intensity. And as darkness deepens further, the forest returns once more to its quieter state, not as an absence of life, but as a different expression of it. Above the canopy, stars reappear. The sky becomes visible again through gaps in leaves and branches. Moonlight filters down in soft, fragmented patterns, illuminating only small portions of the landscape at a time. Below, roots continue their unseen exploration. Fungal networks maintain their silent exchanges. Leaves hold moisture collected from the cooling air. And throughout all of it, plants remain anchored in place, yet continuously engaged with everything around them. They do not move through the world. They build their existence within it. And so the cycle continues, not as repetition in the strict sense, but as ongoing transformation shaped by light, time, and connection. Each day layering upon the last, each night preparing the conditions for what comes next, in a rhythm that has persisted across millions of years and will continue long after any single moment has passed. As the night deepens into its most silent hours, the forest reaches a state that feels almost suspended, yet remains fundamentally alive. This is the part of the cycle where outward motion is least visible, and yet the internal world of plants becomes especially important. Without the influence of direct sunlight, the forest shifts into maintenance, regulation, and preparation for the return of dawn. It is a phase defined not by inactivity, but by subtle continuity. Inside every plant, cellular processes continue to operate within tightly regulated limits. Energy that was stored during the day is carefully allocated to sustain essential functions. Proteins are repaired, cellular structures are maintained, transport systems continue to move water and nutrients, though at a slower and more conservative pace. Nothing is wasted because nothing can be. Survival in plants is a matter of balance rather than urgency. Even in darkness, plants remain highly responsive to their environment. Temperature fluctuations, humidity changes, and air movement are continuously registered through physical and chemical mechanisms. These signals influence internal processes that will shape how the plant behaves when light returns. The forest, even at rest, is always preparing. 8. One hasra kasi. One of the most profound aspects of plant life becomes especially noticeable in these hours: the absence of urgency. Unlike animals, plants do not need to respond instantly to threats or opportunities. Their survival strategies are distributed across time. A change in condition today may only result in a visible response days, weeks, or even seasons later. This temporal distance between stimulus and response defines much of plant behavior. A drought, for example, does not produce immediate visible collapse. Instead, it triggers internal adjustments that gradually reduce water loss, alter growth patterns, and prioritize survival over expansion. A plant may enter a conservative mode long before the environment becomes visibly hostile. In this way, plants are constantly forecasting their own survival, not through prediction in a conscious sense, but through biochemical sensitivity to environmental trends. Even reproduction follows this extended timeline. Many plants only flower when a complex set of conditions has been met over time: accumulated temperature, seasonal length, water availability, and internal energy reserves. The decision to reproduce is not immediate. It is the result of long-term environmental reading, and once reproduction begins, the process itself unfolds slowly, carefully, and often in coordination with surrounding ecosystems. Seeds form gradually within protective structures. Fruits develop as energy is redirected toward future generations. Some seeds remain dormant even after dispersal, waiting for conditions that may not arrive for years. Within each seed lies not only genetic information, but a strategy for timing. Timing is one of the most critical elements in plant life. Germinating too early can lead to failure. Waiting too long can mean missing favorable conditions. Evolution has shaped seeds to respond to specific environmental triggers: temperature shifts, moisture levels, light exposure, or even chemical signals from fire or digestion. This sensitivity allows plants to synchronize life cycles with environmental rhythms. As night continues, the forest floor becomes increasingly important to overall ecosystem function. Without sunlight, the canopy's dominance fades visually, and attention shifts downward. Here, decomposition becomes the central process shaping the landscape. Fallen leaves, branches, and organic matter begin their gradual transformation into soil. Microorganisms break down complex compounds into simpler forms. Fungi extend networks through decaying material, extracting nutrients and redistributing them through underground systems. What appears as decay is, in reality, conversion. The forest floor is not a place of endings. It is a place of transformation. This transformation ensures that nothing in the ecosystem remains unused for long. Every fallen structure becomes part of future growth. Nutrients cycle continuously between living and non-living states, maintaining a dynamic equilibrium that supports long-term stability. In this sense, forests are self-renewing systems, and even in the absence of visible movement, energy continues to flow. Roots remain active in soil, adjusting growth in response to moisture gradients and nutrient availability. Fungal networks continue transporting materials between plants, responding to shifts in environmental conditions. Chemical signals move slowly through soil and air, influencing nearby organisms in subtle ways. The forest is not silent. It is simply operating at a scale beyond immediate perception. Above ground, leaves rest in still air, occasionally shifting with faint nighttime breezes. Dew forms and accumulates, adding weight and moisture to surfaces. This moisture will later be reabsorbed or evaporated as morning approaches, contributing to the next phase of the cycle. Even water participates in the rhythm of the forest. As temperature drops further, metabolic activity within plants adjusts again. Certain processes slow to conserve energy. Others continue steadily to maintain structural integrity. The balance between conservation and maintenance is delicate, shaped by millions of years of evolutionary refinement. There is no single state of rest, only shifting levels of activity. In this quiet darkness, the forest appears unified not by movement, but by continuity. Every organism remains connected through shared environmental conditions, underground networks, and long-term ecological cycles. Nothing is isolated, even when it appears still. And this interconnectedness extends beyond individual forests to global systems. Plants across the planet collectively influence atmospheric composition, climate regulation, and energy distribution. From tropical rainforests to grasslands to microscopic ocean phytoplankton, plant life forms a continuous biological layer that sustains oxygen levels and supports nearly all complex life. Even distant ecosystems are linked through the atmosphere itself. Carbon cycles between plants, soil, oceans, and air in processes that operate on both short and geological timescales. What is absorbed in one region may be released in another, carried through wind and water in continuous exchange. The planet functions as an integrated system, with plants playing a central role in its stability. As night reaches its deepest point once again, the forest remains in this quiet mode of existence. No dramatic changes occur, no sudden shifts interrupt the rhythm. Instead, there is a steady persistence that continues beneath darkness. Life does not pause. It maintains itself, and within that maintenance, the conditions for another day are already being prepared, silently, gradually, and without interruption, waiting for the return of light that will once again set the entire system into visible motion, continuing a cycle that has repeated across unimaginable spans of time, and will continue long after any single observer has gone. Before the faintest hint of dawn returns, there is a moment in the forest that feels almost indistinguishable from stillness. Not because life has stopped, but because every process has reached a kind of equilibrium. Temperatures stabilize at their lowest point. Moisture settles into soil and leaf. Air movement becomes minimal. Even sound seems to retreat into the background of existence. And yet, beneath this apparent quiet, the forest remains fully engaged in itself. Plant life during this phase is defined by conservation and internal balance. Energy reserves accumulated during previous cycles are carefully managed to maintain cellular function. Structural proteins are repaired, membranes are stabilized, metabolic processes continue at reduced intensity, ensuring that no system drifts out of alignment. Nothing in the forest is ever truly idle. It only changes pace. This subtle continuity is one of the most defining characteristics of plant existence. Unlike organisms that rely on rapid response or movement, plants operate through persistence distributed across time. Their survival is not dependent on moment-to-moment action, but on long-term stability. In this way, a single night is not a pause in life, but part of a continuous flow that stretches across seasons. 7. As the first light begins to reappear, even before direct sunlight reaches the ground, plants respond in advance. Internal clocks that regulate daily rhythms have already anticipated this moment. These circadian systems allow plants to prepare for photosynthesis before photons arrive, ensuring that biochemical pathways are ready at the precise moment energy becomes available. This anticipation is not awareness in the human sense, but it is timing refined through evolutionary memory. Light itself does not arrive as a switch being turned on. It emerges gradually across the landscape, reshaping visibility layer by layer. The upper canopy responds first, followed by mid-level vegetation, and finally the shaded understory where light arrives last and in the weakest form. Each layer of the forest experiences morning differently, and within each layer, countless individual organisms adjust their internal states accordingly. Stomata begin to open gradually, allowing controlled gas exchange. Water transport increases as evaporation resumes. Photosynthetic machinery is reactivated, ready to capture energy as soon as conditions allow. The forest does not awaken suddenly. It aligns. One of the most remarkable aspects of this daily transition is how synchronized it is across vast ecological scales. Trees separated by meters or even kilometers respond to the same environmental signals at nearly the same time. This coordination emerges not from communication, but from shared exposure to the same physical conditions. Temperature gradients, light intensity, and atmospheric composition act as universal cues. In this sense, the forest is less a collection of individuals and more a distributed system responding collectively to its environment. As daylight strengthens further, biochemical activity increases across all plant tissues. Chloroplasts activate. Enzymatic reactions accelerate. Water transport systems resume full flow. Sugars are synthesized and distributed throughout the organism. Photosynthesis, one of the most fundamental processes on Earth, resumes its continuous global cycle. This process is so widespread that it shapes the composition of the atmosphere itself. Oxygen is released as a byproduct of energy conversion, while carbon dioxide is absorbed from the air. This exchange occurs simultaneously across billions of plants, grasses, algae, and aquatic microorganisms. The atmosphere is not static. It is constantly shaped by living systems, and within forests, this exchange becomes especially concentrated. Dense vegetation acts as both a producer and regulator of atmospheric gases, contributing to local humidity, temperature moderation, and even precipitation patterns. In many regions, forests generate their own microclimates. This means that plant life does not simply exist within climate systems. It actively participates in their formation and maintenance. As morning progresses, the visible structure of the forest becomes increasingly detailed. Individual leaves catch light differently depending on orientation and species. Variations in texture, shape, and color become more pronounced. What was once a unified silhouette resolves into a complex arrangement of distinct forms. Yet even this clarity is temporary. As sunlight intensifies, shadows shift and patterns change again. Wind introduces movement into branches and leaves, altering the distribution of light across the forest floor. The environment remains in constant flux, even within a single morning. Plants respond continuously to these micro-changes. Leaves adjust their angles slightly to optimize light absorption or reduce overheating. Stems shift growth direction incrementally over time. Roots respond to changing soil moisture following overnight condensation and evaporation cycles. These adjustments are small but cumulative. Over time, they define the architecture of the forest. Beneath the surface, soil ecosystems remain active throughout this entire process. Microbial communities continue decomposing organic matter, releasing nutrients back into the environment. Fungal networks maintain connections between plants, facilitating exchange of resources and biochemical signals. The soil is not separate from the forest. It is part of its internal structure, and within this structure, time operates differently. Organic matter may persist for days, months, or years before fully decomposing. Nutrients may cycle through multiple organisms before returning to plant systems. Carbon may move between living and non-living states repeatedly across long durations. Everything in the forest is part of a continuous exchange. As the day continues, energy captured by plants is distributed throughout ecosystems. Some supports immediate growth, some is stored for future use, some contributes to reproduction. Some maintain structural stability against environmental stress. This allocation is dynamic, shifting in response to changing conditions. There is no fixed strategy, only adaptation within constraints. And yet, despite this constant variation, the forest maintains coherence. It does not collapse into chaos. Instead, it remains organized through interaction, feedback, and balance across multiple scales of time and space. This balance is not imposed, it emerges. Human observers often describe forests as peaceful, and part of that perception may come from this underlying stability. But that stability is not the absence of change. It is the result of change distributed so widely and continuously that no single moment appears disruptive. Even disturbances become part of the system. A falling branch, a shifting season, a passing storm, all contribute to long-term ecological structure. The forest absorbs these events and incorporates them into its ongoing development. Nothing exists outside the cycle. As the morning continues toward midday, the forest reaches another peak of activity. Photosynthesis operates at full capacity. Growth processes accelerate where conditions allow. Atmospheric exchange increases. Water cycles intensify, and through it all, plants remain engaged in the slow, continuous act of becoming what they are, not fixed, not finished, always in process. And in that ongoing process, the forest carries forward the same rhythm it has maintained for millions of years, shaped by light, sustained by water, anchored in soil, and woven together through countless invisible connections that hold the living world in a state of quiet, persistent continuity.